If you're expecting all of the Giants' problems to be magically solved in one off season under Buster Posey, are you setting yourself up for disappointment?
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, been hosting this show for over 5.5 years, and I'm a lifelong Giants fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. So check us out there if you have not already, and please hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you're following the show. This episode is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.com, booking.yeah. The right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your baseball rivals. Book today on Booking.com, the official accommodation partner of Major League Baseball. Get the Booking.com app today. And coming up on today's show, we are going to continue going through your mailbag questions. Thank you so much to those who submitted questions on Twitter/X. Getting right into them, Aiden says, realistically, what can Buster Posey accomplish in one offseason? Cut payroll? Yes. Maybe sign one or two impact players, get under the tax, but fix drafting, fix drafting, player development, etc. will take decades. So I don't know about decades with an S there. 20 years, to fix drafting and player development. That's kind of a long time, but certainly not one off season. And so that's why I said, if you're expecting things to just magically turn around in one off season, are you setting yourself up for failure? So in terms of the payroll, the Giants did, I think Farhan Zaidi already kind of did some of the moves that slashed the payroll to get them down to a final estimated payroll of $206 million for 2024, with a luxury tax payroll of $252 million, which is over the first luxury tax threshold but under the second. And worth pointing out that their estimated luxury tax payroll already going into next year is just $136 million, and that includes Blake Snell and Wilmer Flores, and I believe arbitration estimates to all their arbitration eligible players. It may not include the ARB estimates, but it may, because MLB Trade Rumors has come out with those estimate figures, and that's something we will get into in a later episode as well. But Blake Snell, that's going to come off the books unless they re-sign him. But so I don't think Buster Posey has to do too much in order to cut payroll, nor do I know for sure whether or not they intend to cut payroll. I think that it's going to be business as usual in the sense that they are really, really trying to make the playoffs. They do not want to keep missing the postseason. Buster Posey is not going to come in here and just tear this team down. That's not what's going to happen. They're never going to do that under this ownership group, and I'm happy about that. And I also think, you look at the Matt Chapman extension, there's no way they're trying to just tear this thing down, right? And you look at, they've got Logan Webb under contract through 2028. They've got Robbie Ray with 2 more years on his deal. They signed Jung-Hoo Lee to a 6-year contract with an opt-out after 2027, but that's 3 more guaranteed years for Jung-Hoo Lee. And yeah, so I'm not saying they have this great competitive window right now, but the right moves could make them a contender. They're not that far off. They're right around 500. And so if you can get impact talent from a couple of spots, that could be enough to put you in the postseason. And as we've already seen with some teams like the Royals, who lost 103 or 105 games 2 years ago, making the playoffs this year and then winning against the Orioles. Just get in. The Tigers, same thing. Just get in, and then they win a playoff series against the Astros, who hadn't missed the championship series since 2016 until now. And by the way, the president of baseball operations for the Tigers is the Giants' former GM, Scott Harris. So anyway, what can Posey accomplish in one offseason? Cutting payroll would be easy because it's already cut, basically, with players coming off the books, etc. It just depends on how much they add. And if you add less than getting you to last year's number, then you've cut payroll. But I don't think there's moves to make that they need to make in addition to cut further payroll. But yeah, maybe sign one or two impact players. I could definitely see that. I could see like Willy Adames and Blake Snell or Corbin Burns or something. I could see that. I think that's somewhat realistic. Juan Soto, less realistic, but still someone they ought to pursue, even if it's a long shot. Get under the tax, that should be easy, like I said. But then you're right, fixing, drafting, and player development will take a long time. I disagree. It will take decades. Like, that literally means to me 20 years. No, I don't think it takes that long, but certainly more than one offseason to fix that, or at the very least to see the fruits of that. Like, you may make moves that ultimately improve that process now, but at the big league level, you just don't necessarily see those rewards right away. Although we could see certain players who are already in the system kind of buck the trend and be that impact type player. Like Bryce Eldridge is close to the major leagues, even though he's just 19 years old. He made it to AAA this season. It was mostly that he made it to AA, and then they wanted him to get another week of at-bats, so they sent him to AAA. But nonetheless, I mean, this guy's 19 and potentially a star, drafted by the Farhan Zaidi regime, which is still in place for now, except for Zaidi himself. Michael Holmes and Kyle Haynes, farm director and director of amateur scouting. Haynes is the farm director, Holmes, director of amateur scouting. So those guys, from what I have read, will remain in their roles. And so that kind of hints at not necessarily seeing major changes in drafting and player development. But I think they've done a pretty decent job of that, even though farm system rankings, I just don't put too much stock into that. Although obviously you want to have impact farm system kind of players, but they have graduated some good ones like Bailey and Harrison. Birdsong was a nice story this season. Tyler Fitzgerald, Elliot Ramos, like graduates. But they definitely need to get better in that regard. There's no doubt. So anyway, what can he accomplish? I don't know. I mean, maybe like the one big thing, we talked about this on the last episode, would be perhaps going against the grain and signing a starting pitcher to a long-term deal, like a Corbin Burns or a Blake Snell. Now, I have concerns about Snell's age, but I don't have concerns about how he's pitching right now. So if you want to get that impact arm to pair with Logan Webb for at least a few years before decline perhaps sets in and injuries become more of a concern, maybe you take that risk if you're Buster Posey, whereas Farhan Zaidi pretty clearly wasn't willing to take that risk even when the player wanted to return. The player was best friends with Logan Webb. We're talking Kevin Gausman here. And by the way, Kevin Gausman had a good first 2 years in Toronto, but this year, just look at the numbers. He kind of took a step backwards, and now there's two more years left on that deal. So we'll see how it finishes up. But I think that, and then Carlos Rodon hasn't had success as a Yankee. And so these are things worth paying attention to, but I don't know. It'll be very interesting to see. Who do they hire as GM? What is different? Do they make any other like major changes at important roles? Like, what does Pete Patella do? Does he actually get reassigned or does he leave? And so there's a ton of unknowns is essentially the answer. But I think if you are expecting just everything to be fixed and changed, then you may be setting yourself up for disappointment. So coming up in just a minute, we'll switch gears and talk about some specific players, including Patrick Bailey and Bryce Eldridge. Should Bailey give up on switch hitting after a second straight year of falling apart offensively down the stretch. We'll get into it in just a minute, and before we do, today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you in part by FanDuel. Now, at FanDuel, which is America's #1 sportsbook, you can Today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you in part by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So I'm over on FanDuel.com right now, checking out, there's some playoff baseball, Brewers and Mets tonight. Brewers are favorites at -130 on the money line, and then for the 49ers coming up, they're favorites at home against the Arizona Cardinals. Those odds have been changing the longer we've looked at this throughout the week. They're at -360, the 49ers on the money line. So again, check it out, FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Today's episode is also brought to you in part by Prize Picks. On Prize Picks, you can now win up to 100 times your money, with as little as 4 correct picks. And Prize Picks is the best way to get action on sports in over 30 states, including California. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. And Prize Picks is the best way to win real money this football season. We've been talking to you about baseball all season, but now football season. Which players are going to go off? Which ones aren't? Make your picks in less than 30 seconds. I can vouch for that. And turn your sports opinions into real money all season long on Prize Picks. Download the app today and use code all lowercase LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code all lowercase LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, as promised, we are going to get into more questions and answers. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. The next question comes from El Hijo de Whopper Jr., who says, do you think Patrick Bailey should give up switch hitting in 2025? I imagine he'd be a better hitter if he didn't have to worry about having to be productive from both sides. So it's an interesting question, mostly because it gives me the opportunity to look and see if, his trends of being what was in the minor leagues, a much better hitter from the left side, have continued. I haven't really looked at his splits. I do see it on FanGraphs. They have this cool new player card thing. If you're a subscriber, highly recommend supporting FanGraphs if you can. But he had a major dip basically in offensive production from the end of July up until he bottomed out in mid-August, and then by mid-September he was back to being roughly league average on a per 15 game period. And so it's a huge dip. If you look at the graph, it's really interesting because he was really steady at above average offense, and then just an enormous decline. But then he did make it all the way back up to roughly league average over, again, a 15 game. It's a rolling 15 game graph here. So, it's not just in one game he was league average. It's saying in his last 15 games, he was league average by the end of the season. So that's worth pointing out, and good for him. I'm glad that he got to end the season that way. But just let's look at the splits for his performance against lefties and against righties. So against left-handed pitching, meaning as a right-handed batter, this is why it's so unreliable in a small sample. Last year, he did better against left-handed pitching, which was such a surprise because that wasn't the minor league track record. He hit 298, 348 on base, 481 slugging against lefties last year. It's a 127 weighted runs created plus. Against righties, he had just a 53 weighted runs created plus, hitting 203, 255 on base, 302 slugging. Yuck. Well, it was kind of reversed in 2024 in that against right-handed pitching, he had a 95 weighted runs created plus, so that's roughly league average. And against left-handed pitching, he had a 31 weighted runs created plus, which is 70% below average. And so when you look at stuff like this, it is exactly why, and we've seen the same thing with Mike Yastrzemski. This 1 year, it's like he was better against left-handed pitching, and people freak out and say he's got reverse splits. The thing about platoon splits is that they are unstable in season-to-season samples, and so we've got to look at a bigger picture. We need talk about decades. You need 10 years basically of a player before you get a sense of if they have different than league average type platoon splits. Although for a switch hitter, it's a little different because it's not really platoon splits, because for Bailey, he always has the platoon advantage. That's the point of being a switch hitter. But I think it's worth looking at, okay, what is it combined in the 2 seasons? Well, against left-handed pitching, he's been 18% below major league average offense in his career. Against right-handed pitching, he's been 22% below average. So it's kind of an even split, like a 78 weighted runs created plus against righties and an 82 against lefties. I mean, that is close enough that it's not statistically significantly different. Going a little deeper, his strikeout rate against lefties is 29.5%. His strikeout rate against righties is only 23%, so there is a big difference there. Isolated power, 114 against righties, 114 against lefties. Very interesting, exactly the same. It's the batting average on balls in play. It's been 331 against lefties despite the higher strikeout rate, and just 298 against righties with the lower strikeout rate. So, and the numbers have kind of changed on me as I've clicked around here. It says actually 288 against right-handed pitching for the batting average on balls in play. Sometimes now it says 298. I'm not sure. Fangraphs is a little wonky sometimes when you start clicking buttons. But anyway, this conversation happens all the time. And in general, guys just don't give up switch hitting that easily. I mean, Pablo Sandoval was always better from the left side. He never gave it up. I look at Ozzie Albies. He's doing it right now. He's the second baseman for the Atlanta Braves. They were just eliminated, so he's not doing it anymore. But he had, I think it was a fracture in one of his hands, and he was comfortably swinging from the right side, his much better side historically. He's great from the right side, not so good from the left side. And yet he hasn't given up on switch hitting, except he did because of this hand injury. He didn't feel it batting from the right side, but he did from the left side. So he just canned left-handed hitting and just faced righties from the right side for the first time in his career. And, he started off slow, but then did perform well down the stretch there for the Braves as their season made it into the postseason, and then they fell off and lost. But still, all of this to say, guys who switch hit, they just don't give it up that easily. It's not like Bailey has had much more success from one side than the other. I'm not so sure if he's been doing it for his whole life and he's a pro, a major leaguer, that it's that big of a deal for him. It's just probably feels natural for him to, I think it might be more of a distraction to stop switch hitting than to continue. For him, it's just lefty on the mound, I'm going to get my, right-handed helmet and bat from the right side. And righty on the mound, I'm going to do the opposite. And that's just how he does it. And switching that up may be more of a distraction and an adjustment than just keeping it the same. And due to the fact that there's not a huge split, I don't see exactly what the reason would be. Unless in future seasons, there just develops some trend where he's much better from one side. But right now, that's not the case. Anyway, the next question comes from Steve, who says, will Bryce Eldridge debut in 2025? If yes, cup of coffee, or substantial number of games? So we will get into this question, and also Garrett asking me to respond to a tweet by the famous, well-known Baseball Jeff on Twitter, who fills out what he thinks are the needs for the Giants, and I'm going to fill in who the players I would target based on the needs that Jeff outlines. We'll get into all of that in just a minute, and before we do, today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you in part by Booking.com. Booking.com, booking.yeah. Explore those U.S. cities you always secretly wanted to learn more about. With hotels, bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com, you might just find your perfect stay even in your baseball rival's city during the postseason. And this totally applies right now with the Dodgers and Padres going at it. It's a short flight, short drive down to Southern California, and I've done this myself, gone to postseason games at Dodger Stadium, honestly, like 2017 or 19. I don't remember exactly when it was. 18? I don't know. It was when they were playing the Brewers in the NLCS, just for the fun. And it's true, the right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city. San Diego is a great city. It is a great atmosphere there. Dodgers, Padres is going to be a lot of fun. So Booking.com can help you book a stay that's close to your home team's or rival's stadium. No matter what team you're rooting for this postseason, even if it's neither of them, Booking.com can make you a fan of any U.S. city. From hotels that look over stadiums, family-friendly resorts, cute bed and breakfast stays, Booking.com has so many choices across the U.S. The right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your baseball rivals. Booking.com, booking.yeah. All right, as promised, we are going to get to more questions and answers. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. The next question comes from Steve. Like I said, will Bryce Eldridge debut in 2025? If yes, cup of coffee or substantial number of games? And so I think Buster Posey understands more than anyone, and the fact that he's going to rely on a scout, someone with a scouting background as his GM. He understands the significance of a young player from within your own system coming up and making an impact. Well, that's exactly what he did, leading the team that was like a middling team, and then suddenly being a star, he elevated them. It's like Bobby Witt Jr. on the Royals. The rest of that team isn't that impressive, but Bobby Witt Jr. like just elevates them to a crazy level because he's that good of a player. And I think Posey did the same thing. And look, Bryce Eldridge struggled in 8 games in AAA, but he also did well in 9 games in AA. The reason he got moved was because their season was ending and AAA had a little bit more playing time for him, more games before the season ended. But this guy is 19 years old. He turns 20 this month, so he's not going to be a teenager much longer. But nonetheless, I mean, he has just had a massive season in his first pro season. I mean, I guess he debuted actually in 2023, a handful of games, 15 in A-ball at the age of 18. And yeah, it's just kind of amazing looking at, I mean, in high A, Eldridge he hit 335, 442 on base, 618 slugging, and doing this at such a young age. He's also 6'7", 233, according to Fangraphs, first baseman. And so that factors in to what we're going to talk about next when we address Baseball Jeff's kind of outline of what he would target for the offseason. But anyway, to get to your question, I think, yes, Bryce Eldridge debuts in 2025, and I think more than a cup of coffee. As long as he performs in the high levels of the minors, AA, AAA, I think they're going to, they need impact talent, and he has the potential to be that. And to do it at a young age, I don't know that they'll just thrust him into the major leagues on opening day, but it wouldn't shock me if he pulls a Buster Posey and, a couple months into the season, month and a half, even a month, like he could come up and, seize a role. Because Farhan Zaidi said, and I'm sure that this was in part in sync with ownership, which included Posey and the board of directors, which includes Posey, that they weren't intending to sign a first baseman to a multi-year long-term deal in order to maintain a path for Bryce Eldridge. So that alone tells me that they intend and expect and hope that this guy is going to seize a significant role and hopefully never look back starting in 2025. So Garrett asks, referring to this tweet by Baseball Jeff, how would you fill out the needs for the 2025 Giants? And Jeff says, quote, these are my SF Giants needs for 2025, not ranked in order. Corner outfielder, middle infielder, first baseman, one starting pitcher, couple of relievers, including a lefty, around the margins. So, corner outfielder, Juan Soto. I mean, come on. You got me set up for that one. Of course, like ideally I would say Juan Soto. Now, assuming Juan Soto isn't gonna end up here, that's a totally different, like, this is a hard question to answer, like, because I don't get to just pick, right? The players get to pick. But Juan Soto is far and away the best option as a corner outfielder. When we look at free agent outfielders in general, I'm trying to sort by outfield here, and Teoscar Hernandez is out there, had a big season with the Dodgers, offensively especially. Anthony Santander, switch hitter who hit a lot of homers this season with the Orioles, is out there, hit 44 home runs with the Orioles. Not known as a great defender. Trying to look at the defensive metrics, he's played primarily right field. In fact, he only played right field and 1 inning at first base this season. And in right field, -7 defensive runs saved, -2 outs above average. In the past, he's been better and had better seasons. And so maybe moving him to left, especially at Oracle Park, that could be a good fit. Switch hitter is always nice. I don't have his platoon splits pulled up. But yeah, I mean, I low strikeout rate, that's kind of jumps off the page, only 19.4% this year. Not sure power hitter, you're always going to have a tough time getting power hitters to want to come here. But yeah, I mean, I like Teoscar Hernandez, although he also hasn't rated out too well defensively this year. In left for the Dodgers, -8 defensive runs saved, -9 outs above average. In right field, he was better for some reason this year, but overall graded out negatively and has in his whole career as an outfielder. And then Tyler O'Neill is another guy that I'm looking at here. Had a nice offensive season, 31 homers in just 113 games. Any of these guys stand out as pretty nice fits. Defensively, O'Neill played only corner outfield in 2024, and according to outs above average, defensive run saved +1, although he's typically in his career graded out well defensively, but outs above average had him at -4 this year. So there's defensive questions about all of these guys, maybe the least about Tyler O'Neill. O'Neill is 29, turns 30 in June. Santander is 29, turns 30 this month. Teoscar Hernandez is 31, turns 32 on the 15th of this month. So, the youngest is Tyler O'Neill, and the oldest is Teoscar Hernandez. Santander is pretty young. I like the switch hitting of Santander, but I would go hard after Juan Soto. I know it's like very unlikely, but I would just throw, $600 million at Juan Soto if it was up to me. It's not my money. And then middle infield, I've discussed this. I think Ha-Seong Kim or Willy Adames. I just did a little bit of a deep dive on a comparison of those two, and I kind of was torn. I think Adames will make more, but I'm not sure he's the significantly better player. Definitely offensively has more upside, but Kim, is just so good defensively and best friends with Jung-Hoo Lee. There's just a lot to like there. First baseman, I would kind of shy away from this because of Bryce Eldridge and because I think LaMonte Wade Jr. platooning with like Wilmer Flores, who has a player option, while it like lets you have that spot for Bryce Eldridge if he's ready. Although it's tempting when you look at Pete Alonso, Christian Walker, trade market, possibly Vlad Guerrero Jr. It's definitely tempting, and I wouldn't close the door on this, but if you could go hard after some of these outfielders and one of these middle infielders and a starting pitcher, one starting pitcher, I would say Snell or Corbin Burns, and just bite the bullet and say, we'll take the risk with the long-term deal for a pitcher. And then when it comes to relievers, there's always a million options. And so I don't necessarily have anyone off the top of my head. I'd have to look at exactly who's out there. There's going to be a zillion. That's kind of the deal with relief pitchers. Tanner Scott, currently on the Padres, that's an intriguing one. But I'm always kind of hesitant to give out big deals to relievers. That's just kind of philosophically because they're so up and down. Like we saw with Camilo Doval this year, right? You can be dominant for 3 years or whatever and then just fall off. So we'll see there. I mean, there's just so many options. But anyway, I like some of the corner outfield options. I do. That could mean a non-tender on Mike Yastrzemski. That'll be one of the big decisions that the front office under Posey has to make. And that decision gets made in like mid-November. So that'll be very interesting to watch. And we'll get into the arbitration projections at a later date. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On MLB. Sully has it all covered for you all postseason long. He's a baseball guru, and he brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every aspect of the playoff picture. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter or X at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out so much. So thank you in advance, and thanks to everyone who's done so already. Can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.